Welcome, Vistage members and guests. I'm Dave Nelson, a 12-year Vistage member out of the Pittsburgh area, and your Fridays with Vistage host. Today we're talking about how to mitigate the risk of data breaches, boy, particularly relevant. And specifically, our expert guest is Lisa Ryder. Her presentation is titled, Your Cybersecurity Don't Let Your Company Be Part of the Headlines. Boy, that sounds like great advice. So, Lisa, welcome to Fridays with Vistage.
Thanks, Dave. It's a pleasure being here.
Let me give just a short bio, and then we'll jump into what is just a fabulous topic. So Lisa Ryder is an attorney with more than 15 years of experience in the claims department at Chubb. Chief among her responsibilities is analyzing data breaches and defending Chubb clients who have experienced a cyber or data breach. By the way, I've heard it said that there's only two types of companies anymore, those that have been hacked and they know it, those that have been hacked and they don't know it. So we got to get into it. But, folks, if you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the WebEx control panel, and we'll answer as many as we can, maybe some as we go, some at the end. So thanks, Lisa. Let's get started.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate everyone's time. So today I'm going to review at a high level the potential cyber exposure your company could face if there's a breach event. I'll discuss the what, how, and why, and then spend some time outlining some steps you can take to help mitigate a breach event. And what you see before you right now is our brief agenda for today. So let's start off talking about whose information is at risk. A key question to ask is, what information do you have or have you collected? What information has been entrusted to your company? For example, a business partner may have entrusted you with confidential information. The types of information that can be at risk includes the information of your customers and clients, for example, credit cards or other proprietary information. It could be the information of the employees and the families, their social security numbers, their bank account, their health information. It could be your company's own information, or as I mentioned earlier, the information of your business partners that you have been entrusted with. Some of the acronyms we're going to talk about today are on the slide before you right now. So PII, that is personally identifiable information. That would be things like your name, your first initial and last name, plus your social security number, a financial account number, driver's license, medical insurance, things like that. Some states are even updating their laws to expand this definition to even include things like your email address. PHI is your personal protected health information. That could include the account on your medical card, but it's also information, for example, about your personal health care items and conditions and things that you discuss with your doctor that you would consider personal. PCI is payment card industry information, so it's your credit cards, it's that information on the magnetic strip on the back of the card, payment history, and things like that. There's also things like trade secrets and other intellectual property, so perhaps merger plans, confidential marketing information, other confidential financial information, let's say confidential profit or loss statements. Then there's also just that general private information, maybe your tax information, your salary information, and things of that sort. So who is taking this information? Well, often companies think that they are safe because they think, well, I'm too small to draw the attention, of the people who are interested in stealing this information. And while it certainly could be true that North Korea or China isn't interested in your particular company's information, there could be local criminals interested in it. What we often see is that the local criminals want credit card information or social security information to steal your identity. We are also seeing an uprise in the local criminals breaking into data banks and computer systems and encrypting them and then basically holding them for ransom. Then you have to consider what I call the international criminals. So that's people like the Russian mob. They're actually interested in the same thing as the local criminals, but on a much broader scale. You also have nation states or terrorists like North Korea, China. I think we've all been reading the headlines about the recent government breach last week. There's also pranksters that are just, out to destroy something, this corporate espionage. So much of the headlines focuses on credit cards that we forget that good old-fashioned corporate espionage has just now moved online. So things like your company's trade secrets, intellectual property, merger information could be of interest to your competitors. And then, of course, one of the largest segments that is responsible for exposing this sort of information is just simple human error. A lost laptop, a lost thumb drive, private information inadvertently posted on a public drive, an email attachment sent to the wrong group of people. That actually happens quite regularly. I want to share a few statistics with you. As you'll see here, and this is based on a yearly study done by the Ponemon Institute. And so here we have malicious or criminal attacks, 42%, human error, 30%, and the system glitch, 29%. So how is this information exposed or taken? We've mentioned a couple of them already. You have the criminal that will directly hack into a computer system and try to steal information. You have malware or viruses that can get delivered via email attachment, so that caution about being careful about clicking on an email attachment, especially if it's from someone that you don't know, is still in effect today. There's also social engineering or phishing. This is a type of fraud that uses email. It could use websites, pop-up messages, text messages, or phone calls to misrepresent a company or person in an attempt to trick someone into sharing information. So what would happen, for example, is there'll be some big headline-making breach at, let's say, a local retail establishment, and everyone will know about it. And then before you know it, you open your email one day, and it looks like you received an email from that retail establishment saying, dear so-and-so, we're very sorry about the breach that just happened and your credit card that got exposed. Please click on this link so we can help you. And it'll look like that company's website. It'll look like their trademark logo and everything like that, but it's actually one of the criminals that have set that up to lure you into a false website. There's also things, as I already mentioned, the negligent employee, but you also have the malicious insider or the malicious employee. So we have seen situations where an employee is leaving company A to go to company B and they steal information. Here's just a different way of representing how this data is being lost. So, for example, we have everything from 3% to viruses to 28% and actual theft and everything in between, social engineering, web exposure, improper disposal, and things like that. One of the things I did want to point out is to keep in mind the vulnerability of your mobile devices. Our phones are actually powerful computers, and we also have to worry about things like our tablets and our laptops. 30 to 35% of breaches are attributed to the loss or theft of a mobile device. They're small, they're easy to lose, they're easy to leave behind at the airport, and we have so much data on them that they pose a very big risk nowadays. So we're going to talk a little bit about what your company's possible exposure could be. So there are currently 47 states, plus Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., and the Virgin Islands that require a company to notify victims after there's unauthorized or potentially unauthorized access to PII, that's personally identifiable information, or PHI, the personal health information. One thing to keep in mind, especially if you do business across the entire country, is that the state law of the state where the affected customer or victim resides governs that notification requirement. So if you have, for example, victims located in 25 different states, you have to consider and abide by the different laws in each of those states. Many states' laws require notification to the state attorney general, state consumer protection agencies, and credit monitoring agencies. Some states allow private rights of actions for these violations, so if you don't adhere to the notification timing requirements, someone could bring a lawsuit based on that. And then if you're in certain types of industries like banking or healthcare, there are actually separate federal laws and reporting requirements for those specific industry sections. So what are some of the types of costs that are common or expenses that you may occur when there is a breach event? There's something here, it's called a breach coach. Really, actually, what a breach coach is an attorney that specializes in this area of law. They keep up to date on those 47 different state laws that I happened to mention. They are also nowadays very much on point with international law as well, since so many companies do business internationally. The forensic IT person, that is typically an outside IT vendor that will specialize in identifying or stopping a breach. But when you think about it, your internal IT people may not have the expertise necessary, but then they also have their day-to-day jobs to do. They can't necessarily drop everything and work 24 hours a day for a couple of days to figure out what's going wrong and to put a stop to it. I mentioned before that these 47 different states have notification requirements. They typically require notification by mail if the addresses of the affected individuals are known. And there are specialized vendors that can handle that sort of volume. So if you have to send out 50,000 notifications or 5 million notifications, these vendors can also help in setting up a call center to handle the volume of phone calls when people have questions. And then it's typical and it's sometimes required, depending on what state you're dealing with, to offer credit monitoring and identity restoration services. It's possible, depending on how big the breach is, that you may need public relations assistance, and then, as I mentioned before, notification of state and federal agencies. Here's some more stats for you. This was a survey last year of a number of U.S. executives. 43% of the companies surveyed had experienced a data breach, and that was actually up 10% from the year before. In the United States, the average number of records affected was 29,000 records for an average cost of $5.8 million. However, it's important to note that the mega data breaches that you may have read in the headlines, for example, the Targets or the Home Depots, weren't even actually included in these in the stats that I'm providing. I mentioned a little bit about the legal exposure. So we have a situation where you have the breach, you've complied with the different laws that you need to comply with, you send out the notifications, you've provided credit monitoring, identity restoration if it was necessary, your call center, and all that has now been taken care of. What we're finding is typically as soon as the headline hits the newspaper and the news that a data breach at a certain company has happened, then quickly thereafter a class action lawsuit will typically be filed. What you'll see here is I did, just for the sake of clarity, say, well, you could possibly have a lawsuit by a single individual. Typically, for the larger data breaches, you're not going to have one person suing a company. It's not worth the time or the legal fees. What you're more apt to see is the class action lawsuit by all the alleged victims. For the last few years, we have seen that plaintiff class action lawyers that specialize in class actions in general have focused on breach lawsuits. So as I said before, we expect that a breach of any size that reaches the headlines will result in at least one class action. Oftentimes, it's multiple class actions in different areas of the country. Now, if credit cards have been taken, you face the potential for lawsuits by the banks that have to replace those cards, or if the banks suffer the fraud losses. You also face what is called PCI, or payment card industry, contractual fines and penalties, possible lawsuits by MasterCard, Visa, Discover, Amex. You could face regulatory or government action. And of course, for anything that I've just spoken of, you have to consider the fact that there are going to be the cost for the lawyers that are going to be necessary to defend the company. Thought I'd spend a few minutes and talk about a few loss scenarios. Obviously, the facts and names have been changed to protect both the innocent and the guilty, but at least we can have some real-life parameters and some numbers around. So as you'll see here, I'm not going to read the slide to you, but we have a lost laptop which is a very common scenario. In this case, we have 7,500 records plus some business and proprietary information that's taken. So what could be a realistic result from an event like this? Well, I would not be surprised to see that the consulting firm involved would incur about $500,000 in expenses associated with notifying the clients about the theft, changing account numbers, hiring a PR firm, establishing a call center, retaining counsel, and all the notice and compliance obligations I've spoken of. Credit monitoring services for a year for an event of this size could easily be $150,000. You could expect another $250,000 in legal defense fees if there were class action lawsuits, and those could settle for anywhere from the low six figures to $1 or $2 million, depending on what sort of information was taken. So some of the lessons to consider about an event like this, which I'm sure almost anyone listening to this could see happening, a laptop can be stolen from your home, it can be stolen from your car, it could be stolen from the conveyor belt at the airport. Use encryption and strong password protection, especially on your mobile devices. You want to ask and train your employees as to whether the information they are downloading to these mobile devices is really necessary for them to complete that project at home. So for example, is it really necessary to download that database of all employee social security numbers to finish a project at home? It's so easy to download that stuff at the touch of the button. The memory space is so inexpensive and our devices have so much capacity, we sometimes do that without even thinking. Here we have another event. So we have a company that outsourced the storage and protection of their employee information to a third-party vendor. Often when I speak on this topic, I will have someone, if I'm there in person, raise their hand and they will say, well, we outsource all this, so I don't really have to worry about anything you're talking about. Well, that is incorrect. The legal responsibility for protecting the information and for notifying the affected individuals should there be a breach always lies with the owner of the data. So in this case, I could easily foresee a company incurring $200,000 in expenses associated, again, with notifying the employees about the theft of the information, changing those account numbers, call center, counsel, all those compliance obligations. Credit monitoring restoration services could be $50,000. There could be an additional $100,000 in legal defense for the lawsuits that follow. And again, a lawsuit, a class action such as this, could settle for anywhere in the low to high six figures. In this case, the company could attempt to pursue that third-party service provider because the breach actually happened there. But it's possible that that third-party vendor doesn't have sufficient financial strength. Maybe they don't have insurance to cover an event such as this. So something to take away, a lesson to consider. Keep in mind, if it's your data or you collected the data, it's always going to be your responsibility. Even if you have an indemnity agreement in place with your vendor, which is certainly something that would be a good practice, the law will still look to your company first. Have to keep in mind, even if you have an indemnity agreement, what if that vendor has inadequate insurance or inadequate financial resources? Something else to consider is, what if they do have all those things? So when you were entering into your relationship with the vendor, you did your due diligence. You have the indemnification agreement. You made sure that they have financial strength, and you make sure that they have insurance. If the breach is large enough and there are so many of their customers that are affected, that financial strength, that insurance may not be sufficient. So here we have something, another scenario where we have a disgruntled employee who steals information. Considering the size of this proposed breach, the hotel could incur more than $2.5 million easily in expenses associated with the forensic investigation, trying to figure out exactly what did this employee take. And then, again, they face the privacy notification, credit, identity monitoring, restoration, public relations, regulatory defense fees. They could also face, in this instance, millions of dollars in fines and penalties as the result of the unauthorized access to this database. So something to consider. Make sure you have adequate safeguards in place. Make sure that when former employees or when employees leave, that their IT access and the computer access is cut off promptly and that you collect all their mobile devices. Don't forget the publicity costs that are very difficult to measure. You know, how much harm did this hotel chain suffer to their name and brand and reputation because this was all over the headlines? Here we have a situation where an employee innocent loses another mobile device. For something that happens of this size, $750,000 in expenses associated with notifying those patients, hiring that public relations firm, the call center, monitoring, retaining independent counsel. And then in addition, the class action lawsuit, those defense fees could be $500,000. A settlement could reach the seven figures. You know, here we're talking about health information. That's very private information. People can suffer a lot of emotional distress if that becomes public. But then on top of this, because this is in the healthcare industry and that is regulated by specific federal laws, so a company like this could also suffer fines by the Department of Health and Human Services. So again, for a breach of this size, we could see a fine of $500,000 being paid by the company. So remember, in this case, I would say that even innocent situations can lead to litigation and can lead to fines and penalties. So something to keep in mind as we turn our attention away from some of these loss scenarios. This problem is a global problem. Even though the examples I gave are very U.S.-centric examples, so much business is being done globally. You have different countries and different laws to take into account. Unfortunately, you also have to keep in mind that the bad guys, the criminals, the hackers, are often in other countries, so it's very hard to find them or to stop them, and you can pretty much forget about regaining the information once they have stolen it. Any and every business is impacted, so it's not just people who take credit cards or not just the healthcare industry. At minimum, a company, even a small company, has the private financial information of their employees. You have their Social Security numbers. You have their bank account numbers because almost everyone direct deposits. You may have health information or other Social Security numbers and other financial information of their dependents, their spouses, and their children. So I'm going to turn our attention a little bit to some of the steps you can take to mitigate the risk. It's kind of our overview of our topic here, transfer risk. We'll talk very briefly about training and incident response plannings, and then there's some slides at the end for some additional takeaway information. So starting off with transfer of risk. Obviously, you can't talk about transfer of risk without talking about insurance, but this is not an insurance seminar, so I'm not going to go very much into detail. But it is the most obvious risk transfer. You know, one of the things to keep in mind, one of the things I hear when I speak on this topic is, well, I don't take credit cards, I don't need cyber insurance. Well, as we've already reviewed today, credit cards are not the only information at risk. Another common justification for not purchasing insurance is, well, we outsource all of our stuff. Well, remember, even if you outsource it, there are two very important things to keep in mind. The legal obligation always remains, so the obligation to notify, credit monitoring, et cetera, always remains with the company that owns or collected the information. Now, I will say that some states like California are expanding their laws to include not only the companies that own or collect the PII, but they also are including the companies that merely maintain it. So the example I gave with the vendor, both of those companies under California law would have certain legal requirements. Also remember that any protection provided by outsourcing information or the hosting of the information or the collecting of the information is only as strong as the indemnification agreement you have in place with that vendor and the insurance or financial strength of that third-party vendor. That brings us to our second transfer of risk vehicle on the slide, which is indemnification agreements. Indemnification agreements are great ideas. I don't want anyone to think that I'm saying don't use them. Just be aware that they're only worth the paper they're printed on unless you look behind them. So the true value of an indemnification agreement is if the other party has adequate insurance or adequate financial strength. Also, keep in mind the reverse situation where you may be asked to indemnify your business partners who are entrusting you with confidential information. Is that a risk you are prepared to take on, and do you have adequate protections in place? Okay, so we obviously can't talk about managing risk without at least having a slide on technology. Now, I'm not a technology expert, so I'm not going to be covering this topic in a lot of depth. But something to consider beyond all the obvious things like firewalls and virus protection and all those things that I'm sure your IT people have set up, but is actually having a risk assessment done by an outside expert, which should include something called penetration testing. There are IT companies that specialize in assessing where you are vulnerable and will test the strength of your technology protections. And if they discover weaknesses, they have the expertise to suggest the solution. So basically, they pretend to be the bad guy and try to break in is what they're doing. And then whatever vulnerabilities they find, they can work with you to shore them up. I think a very important thing to cover is training. As I mentioned earlier in some of the stats I shared, human error causes 30% of the breaches, and one of the best things to address that stat is training. So you want to obviously conduct initial training of all your employees, and that includes all your executives. But you also want to periodically retrain. Once is definitely not enough. Not only does the technology change, not only do the techniques of the bad guys change, but you have to, quite frankly, remind people. They get a little lax in what their security is or what they remember about a training session. So it's definitely something you want to periodically refresh. Some of the areas to consider training on, password strength. How to create a strong password, why it's important. You know, a lot of people don't understand how to, how can I create a strong password? I can't keep track of them. There are techniques to help keep track of them. A strong password used to be letters and a couple of numbers. Now they want you to use capitalization. They want you to use all the different layers of your keyboard. The longer the better. There are things called two-factor identification. So you have 2 steps to go through. So all those sorts of things, but even something as simple as a training session on how to create a strong password is important. You want to try to use encryption, and you want to train your employees on how to use that technology, but where to use it as well. Some companies encrypt everything. Some companies just want certain things encrypted. You want to have the awareness and recognition of what phishing and social engineering is. That's, for example, that fake website. We have seen situations where they will call a call center, let's say at a financial institution, and they'll pretend to be a customer, and they'll have a little bit of information, and in that first phone call, they'll gain a little bit more, and they'll call a second time, and then they'll gain a little bit more, and before you know it, they have enough information to access somebody's account. It's all the psychology behind manipulating people. You obviously want to have an awareness of malware, email attachments, links within emails, and making sure that people aren't attaching or clicking on those attachments. Also just things if the email seems to come from someone that you recognize, but the English is stilted, the language is stilted, it doesn't seem like English is their first language. Well, it may be that a colleague, a friend, a family member, that their email account got broken into, and then the bad guy has access to all their contact information, and they will pretend to be. Usually a giveaway is that the language gives it away. Also consider policies, procedures, and training on the company's privacy policy, social media policy, who can speak on behalf of the company on social media platforms. And then also things like bring your own device to work and personal use of corporate assets. So are you going to allow your employees to access the internet for personal use while they're using a corporate asset, things like that. One of the most important things a company can do in preparation, I think as Dave mentioned, and it's very true, There are only two types of companies, those that have suffered a data breach and those that have suffered it and don't realize it. So one of the most important things any company can do to prepare for that inevitable data breach is having an incident response plan. You'll often hear it either spoken of or referred to in the literature as an IRP. So what is an incident response plan? As I was saying, this is probably the most important non-technical, non-IT related task any company can do to minimize the damage caused by a breach. The IRP is your plan to respond to a breach and the team of people, both internal and external, that are going to be involved in it. There are a couple of key features to an IRP. First is to establish your internal team. And this goes beyond just the IT department, although of course they are going to be included. You want to definitely have a key person that's responsible overall. And then you can consider various other people depending on the size of your company. So beyond the IT person or IT people, maybe you have general counsel, communications, human resources, public relations, marketing. Second, you want to establish your external team. So when you're in the middle of a breach event, and they tend to happen on a Friday afternoon before a long holiday weekend, but you don't have the time to start interviewing the external professionals. So what sort of external professionals should you consider? Well, the first one you want to consider is that attorney that specializes in this area, that what we call the breach coach. If you don't have the chance to line up any other professional but the breach coach, at least the breach coach will have the contacts with the necessary vendors, forensic IT, and law enforcement people. But for a complete IRP, you would go on and go down the list. You may want to line up the forensic IT vendor. Some companies will also line up the vendor that's going to send out all those notifications and man that call center. They will go that far to interview them and select who they're going to use. Third is you want to obviously train your staff on the use of the plan, so that key internal team. You want them to understand the plan and the expectations, and you want to make sure that you update that plan regularly. You do need to revisit it. You don't want to pull it out, that binder, on a Friday afternoon and find that some of your key internal people have left the company. You also want to consider perhaps conducting testing of this plan. You can have a breach, simulate a breach and practice different scenarios. So what would happen if it was an external hacker bent on ID theft? Or what if it was just a misguided email to a customer that had an incorrect attachment to it? What if you have a disgruntled employee who steals HR data? Or what if someone just loses their mobile device or gets stolen out of their car? And you can actually kind of round table it and go through the scenario. So basically what happens is if you have an actual breach, the plan and the team then go into action. They're going to assess and contain and minimize the incident, and they're going to respond based upon the findings from the forensic investigation. One of the important things about the incident response plan and having that team ready to go is that you can deal with the public relations fallout. You can restore confidence in the organization. You can communicate to the affected individuals and minimize that reputational harm. Hopefully that will lead to retaining your customers and clients and ensuring a secure and positive relationship. And then something that you also want to consider doing after that event, and again, remember, it could hopefully be a small event. So maybe it's just that lost mobile device that had just a few pieces of key information. But you want to do a post-breach assessment. Did you learn any lessons? Are there changes necessary to the team or the plan? Is additional information necessary? Perhaps that mobile device wasn't encrypted, and so you're finding out that maybe your employees don't understand the company's policy on encryption, so you take that opportunity to do some additional training. Okay, so our last few slides, and I want to make sure that I leave some time for questions. So our last few slides contain information for your later reference and use, and it's my understanding, and I'm sure this will be mentioned towards the end, that the slides will be available online in the archives at Vistage for everyone to take a look at afterwards. So this slide right here is by one of the experts we work with, Mr. Kellerman, and these are some red flags for assessing your company's cyber exposure. So this would be something, I'm not going to go over it in detail, but certainly something that you may want to take back to your IT people, your general counsel, and kind of go through, do we have these things? And if we don't, what do we need to do to get some of these things in place? So everything from having an IRP to having a policy on mobility. The next slide, also by Mr. Kellerman, who is an expert in managing mobile devices and attacks, is some of the best practices for managing mobile attacks. Again, this would be something that I would suggest that you can take back to your IT people and work with your internal people to see, again, do we have these things in place? Are these things we need to worry about or take a look more closely at? Now, the next two slides, I am very happy to be able to tell all of our listeners today that for the next month, Chubb is offering free access to the Vistage members to the Chubb eRisk Hub. So the eRisk Hub is an online portal that has some excellent information, not just about losses that other companies have suffered, but it actually has things like a sample incident response plan that you could use. It has an incident roadmap that spells out steps that you can take. It has a news center that has information on the latest headlines. One of the things I find most helpful is the risk management tools. They have a lot of white papers and industry articles, and it's broken down. It's very easy to use, but if you were in the healthcare industry, there'll be articles about the healthcare industry. If you're in the financial industry, there'll be articles about that, and there's information about different breaches that the different industry segments have suffered. So it is a great resource. So this slide just kind of talks a little bit about the areas of the eRisk Hub, and this slide gives you the user ID and the password for the next 30 days for the free access. So I really hope that you will all take advantage of that and poke around a little. It's very user-friendly, but it has excellent information. Some additional information I thought I would share with you to kind of, again, to take away, to look at your leisure are the next two slides, which are some additional resources and websites for your review and use. There's a lot of information online, but these are, I kind of called some of the top ones. So I'm not going to go over all of them, but if you look at the very first one, the NIST one, this is the National Institute of Standards, and pursuant to an executive order of the President, they've drafted a framework to allow organizations to apply best practice principles of risk management to improve their own cybersecurity. So that cyber NIST framework is invaluable. If you skip down a little, you'll see the privacylaws.com if you're interested in what some of the different international privacy laws are. Databreaches.net has up-to-date information and news information about recent breaches. The Hunted Privacy blog is a law firm blog that they will have information on how, as the laws are changing, different lawsuits that come in, different case law. The Ponemon.org, that is the entity that conducts some of the surveys and some of the stats that I relied on. They come out with at least once a year, but sometimes throughout the year, a number of different white papers and surveys and stats about what is happening in this area. PrivacyRights.org, a great place for information about the latest and largest public breaches. And again, just a couple of other websites. I would say point out netdiligence.com. They have a great newsletter, and they have a yearly cyber seminar, one on the East Coast that just happened in Philadelphia, and usually one later in the year on the West Coast. This is some additional information about Chubb, and of course, the disclaimer at the end. But so thank you, everybody, for your information. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, please type them in to the chat feature, and I will do my best to answer them.
So, Lisa, I'll jump back in, and oh, good, you backed up to slide 33. So Vistage members, this is a special offer. So for the next month, you've got free access to eriskhub.com using that user ID and that password. And Dennis, you probably heard the answer to your question, but among other things, that would be a place where you could get a template for an incident response plan. So, folks, if you have a question, type it in the Q&A panel, but I've got some questions, Lisa, and thanks for scaring the heck out of us.
I haven't done my job if I haven't scared everybody.
Okay, well, that's good. So you talked about conducting a risk assessment and penetration testing and then ultimately developing this IRP or incident response plan. Can you give us a sense? My guess is that most Vistage members don't have this expertise inside their organization, so they're going to be looking outside. And I realize it will vary based on the complexity of their IT infrastructure and their industry and the kind of data. But, I mean, what are we talking to bring in, some kind of outside experts to help us with that, if that's the way we go? Can you characterize that for us in any way?
David, very much depends on how much information they have and the sort of information and how they house it. But what I can tell you, because you did mention that you're concerned that the Vistage members may not have considered having this sort of testing done or this sort of assessment. If they go to the eRisk Hub, there are links there. You'll see that there are vendors that Chubb uses, but there is a wider group of vendors. The company that runs the eRisk Hub overall is called Net Diligence, and they have lists of vendors there that specialize in this. So if a company was kind of sitting there thinking, how do I even start this process? There are companies there that they can speak to. But, for a smaller company, I mean, you're talking thousands of dollars. To a very large company, it could quite frankly be hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on, again, how much information they have, how they house it, how well their protections are. Obviously, a larger company that has a network that spans the country, if not internationally, to appropriately penetrate, test all of that in all their different systems will be much more expensive.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, and thanks for pointing us to those resources. So folks might want to think about putting out a request for proposal, an RFP, or a request for, quote, RFQ, and getting a few different proposals in if they don't have the expertise in their organizations. I also want to emphasize to any of the CEOs or key executives on the line, if you didn't bring your IT security experts to this webinar today, roughly by the middle of next week, the recording with the embedded slides will be available at vistage.com/webinars. So all of this is being recorded. You can go back and get that. Maybe a good next step would be to have your IT expert review what we've covered today. And again, folks, if you have a question, type it in the Q&A panel. Lisa, thank you very much for not giving us a sales pitch for your insurance services today, but you do write insurance in this space. I'm interested in sort of the further requirements. In other words, you're probably not just going to blindly, here's your policy. What kind of requirements or assessment do you do on your customers? What do they have to have in place even before they can buy insurance?
Well, there's an application that we ask them to fill out, and it talks about what information that they have, and that's probably one of the most difficult things for a company to get their arms around. But it's certainly the place that the underwriting process starts with. What information do you have? Whose information is it? How much of it do you have? So, for example, a smaller company that perhaps only has the information of their employees is one thing. A larger company that does a lot of payment card, credit card, debit card transactions, they'll want to know how many they do on a daily or monthly or yearly basis. And then the questions will get into, and on the conversation will get into what sort of protections do you have, things like firewalls, virus protection, what sort of training do you do, and things like that. And again, we love to see if they have an incident response plan, because then some of this legwork has already been done, because in order to put that incident response plan in place, getting an idea of what information you have and where is it housed and how is it housed is part of that. Obviously, things like if they've had assessments and penetration testing done, that just means that they're a better risk.
Okay, that makes sense. And I like the fact that you're emphasizing training because there's only so much, that technology can do. A lot of this is, we got to get our people trained. We were at our Pittsburgh All City 2 days ago, and we had a FBI cyber crime guy come in. And, he pointed out such almost unthinkable attacks. For example, one thing he said has been known to happen is some black hat hacker will drop a USB drive in the parking lot with the label 2015 employee raises. And, of course, somebody's going to find that little thumb drive, and they'll be curious to look at the file on it, and they'll plug it in, and boom, you're compromised. Or
social engineering at its best.
Yeah, exactly. Another one that scared the heck out of us. I don't know a lot about e-cigarette technologies and vaping, but I guess a lot of people are going that way, and apparently those cigarettes need to be charged via a USB port, and some of them are being contaminated at the manufacturer. So there's like so many ways into a network, and so really you have to train folks to be on the lookout for all these different things.
Well, and the studies have shown that at least 30% of the information that's either lost or misdirected is by human error. So it is that lost mobile device. It's posting something on a public drive instead of a private drive. We have seen situations where it's something as simple as sending an email with an attachment to the wrong group of people. You start typing in, I start typing in DAV for Dave, and, it comes up with Jim Davidson, and I don't realize it, and I push send, and I meant to send it to you, and Jim Davidson gets it.
Yeah. I've also read that just a tremendous portion of these attacks are really due to password weakness and using the same password on multiple sites and having really easy to guess passwords like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So hopefully that's nobody's password listening today. Hey, I want to grab a question here coming in from Andrew because I'm sure it's something that a lot of people will be curious about. So it says, Lisa, you mentioned training is a good way to teach employees about mobile devices. With the line between personal and work devices blurred, what else besides training can you suggest with respect to this exposure on personal mobile devices used for work? I'm sure Andrew's not the only person who has people mixing, personal with professional.
Right. Yeah, and that's where not only training, but it's having a mobile device policy. It's bring your own device to work or the personal use of a corporate asset. I think companies are recognizing it's happening more and more. So you want to have a policy in place as far as what are you going to allow? Are you going to allow company information to be downloaded into someone's personal device and vice versa? To a certain degree, it's training, and like anything else, it's a level of security that you need. Maybe looking over an employee's shoulder. It's also hopefully the employees are trustworthy enough that they're not inadvertently or deliberately mixing that stuff. But a lot of companies are going towards the BYOD, bring your own device to work. And if you're going to do that, I don't want to say, for example, I don't want to carry around 2 iPhones. I just want to have one iPhone. Will my company allow me to, is there an app available that I could then get my work email on my personal device? And some companies do have that, and it's a specific app that they design or have designed, and then they also have access, should I suddenly quit, that they can immediately cut off that access. So those are certainly issues that need to be considered, and there are policies that you want to have in place. Again, experts like the breach coach, we call them a breach coach, but they're basically, again, attorneys that specialize in this area. Sometimes they will help advise companies on these sorts of policies. If you go online and some of the websites I had put on one of those slides, some of them will have sample policies. So like the eRisk Hub has a sample incident response plan. Some of those other privacy websites will have a sample social media policy or a sample bring your own device policy. Oftentimes, if a company is large enough, they have general counsel, the Association of Corporate Counsel, which is an organization that in-house general counsel can belong to. They have a lot of resources having to do with these sorts of policies as well. So there's a lot of different resources.
Yes, and socialmediagovernance.com, I've talked to people about that before because, we put way too much information out there about ourselves, which, creates risk. And by the way, I'm just looking at the control panel here for WebEx. It says Cisco WebEx. It reminds me that some Vistage members use a Cisco product called Meraki to manage and partition their employees' mobile devices. So there are Cisco and other companies out there that make technology that help us get control. Hey, I want to ask a question from Rhonda, who said, are Vistage members allowed to share the user ID and password for the Chubb information that you're showing here for eRisk Hub with their company members, internal members of our company, even though they're not, those people are not Vistage members per se? Is that okay, anyone in their company?
I'm going to say probably not. We'd probably prefer to limit it to just the Vistage members.
Okay, good. Well, that was good to clarify that.
And I appreciate asking. That was very professional.
Fabulous. Cindy asks, how many breaches are due to internal or company-caused issues like lost laptop or an employee stealing something or bad processes versus an actual attacker coming from the outside? And, especially our Vistage companies are sort of smaller to mid-size companies. So do you have any sense of how much is like self-inflicted?
Generally speaking, human error, so a human mistake, 30%. I would probably also include there that probably another 29 to 30%, according to the stats I shared, would be like a system glitch. So, for example, I have seen situations where what was once a private database, because of some coding change on Google, suddenly becomes a public, searchable by Google. So those are kind of like the system glitches, more something like that, or other things we see. We saw, even it could be an employee mistake, even a virus or a malware, because they could inadvertently download it. So yeah, at least a third is by human error, which is one of the reasons why I try to focus on the training.
Okay, that makes sense. Folks, if you have questions, type them in. Lisa, I want to go back to something that you referenced that seems to be happening to a lot of people. I was just speaking to a Vistage group in Phoenix yesterday, and one of the members said this particular problem is rampant through their company. What's called crypto lock or crypto wall 2.0. So what looks like an innocent attachment from somebody maybe even a fellow employee, shows up in your inbox, and you click it. And what it does is it grabs your hard drive and any other attached disks that it can get to. It might spread outside your machine to some other servers within the building network, and it encrypts them. And then you typically get a message that says you have 1 week to pay $500 in Bitcoin, and otherwise we're not going to decrypt your device. You can't get to it. And then you let a week go by, and then a message pops up that says, sorry you waited. It's now going to cost you $1,000, and you have one final week before we destroy the keys. And, reportedly from the people I've read about and talked to, if you actually pay the money, they actually will unlock your disks. They want to have a good reputation for providing good service so that people pay. But this is happening to a lot of companies, including a Vistage member I met this week.
Yes, unfortunately, it absolutely is. So, again, that's why if companies listening to this think, oh, I'm too small, you're not too small. I mean, that's the type of company that, with the example Dave just gave, that a local criminal would focus on, as opposed to, like I said, the Russian mob who might try to break in to a name brand retail company and download millions of credit cards. The more local guy will focus on the smaller companies, and you definitely see the extortion attempts. They've been going on for a while. They're becoming a little bit more prevalent. In fact, I read a story about, I follow a number of different cyber blogs, obviously, as a story about that event happening to a police department.
Oh, yes, I read that one too.
Yeah.
Right, it was
and
a sheriff's department.
It was just easy. It was easier just to pay. So even the police didn't get caught up.
Exactly, but that also emphasizes the need for yet other things like good backup systems and so on. And that was what was saving this nice little Vistage member in Phoenix. They at least could restore from other sources. So you need to have a backup strategy along with everything else.
Yes.
Wow.
And I don't want to plug too much the insurance, Dave, since you complimented me on that, but if you are considering things like insurance, you obviously want to speak to your broker about that, but there is insurance that exists for these types of events. So today we focused on a breach event, and there's obviously insurance that would help with some of the things that I described today. But there are different types of insurance under the cyber umbrella. For example, if your database was encrypted and somebody was holding it for ransom, if you had an event where a virus got delivered and your computer system's locked down and you have to go to those backup plans that Dave is mentioning, there's e-business interruption insurance and things like that. So all these sort of events the industry has considered and has tried to find and provide a risk transfer, also known as insurance, solution for.
Okay.
So you don't have to go it alone.
All right. And by the way, Heather, who's on the line with us, she's one of your associates, right? Is that right, Lisa?
Yes, she's with Joe.
Yeah. So Heather has mentioned that actually this offer for eRisk Hub is open to guests, and so you want to go to the upper, I guess the login box is in the upper right, and enter the user ID and password. Again, it's a 1-month free trial that will allow folks to really see what resources are available there. And Lisa, you mentioned a lot of other great resources, the external blogs and the social media governance database and so on. So just a lot of great stuff. And I'm left feeling like there's so much to master, so much new stuff, but I guess step one is awareness, right? So you've done a great job.
Yes, absolutely,
making us aware.
And you were right, Dave. There is a lot of information out there, so that's why I suggest if the members start with eRisk Hub, it kind of has culled through that information and kind of put the best that's out there in the different categories, or some of those websites. There are hundreds more websites. Those are just websites, I will tell you, that I personally go to often to get information that I need.
All right. Well, I'll share one last anecdote being provided by Rodney in the chat panel. He says he just experienced someone hacking his email and sending out emails to one of his clients pretending to be my company. And he said in this case, thankfully, his client was smart enough to sort of be suspicious and warn him, but it had never occurred to him that something like this could happen. So, well, step one, awareness. Lisa, thank you so much for a really informative webinar today.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you, everyone, for listening.
All right, so folks, please join us again in 1 week. That's going to be Friday, June 19th, same time, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, or wherever you are translating, when Pete Hayes will talk about how operationally focused companies become market leaders, and he's talking part 3, focusing on execution. As always, you can register for that and access this recording and others at vistage.com/webinars. So on behalf of Lisa Ryder and Chubb and the entire team at Vistage International, I'm Dave Nelson. Thank you for joining us. Have a great weekend, and I hope you can sleep. Take care, everybody.